What happens when a perfect life is a perfect lie? Tonight, we take you inside the most exclusive event of the year, the Crystal Legacy Gala, where billionaire tech mogul Alistair Finch was set to be honored. But the real headline wasn't his award. It was the moment his beautiful mistress Cassandra Thorne kissed him on stage in front of the world and in front of his pregnant wife. But his wife, Eleanora Vance Finch, didn't cry. She didn't scream. She did something no one expected. She walked past her husband, picked up the microphone, and brought an empire to its knees. The air in the grand hall of the St. Regis, New York, was not merely conditioned, it was curated. It tasted of money, a metallic tang of ambition, mixed with the floral sweetness of 1,000 white orchids, their petals shivering under the light of chandeliers that dripped Swarovski crystals like frozen tears. This was the Crystal Legacy Gala, the city's premier philanthropic event, and tonight its heart and soul was Alistair Finch. Eleanora Ellie Vance Finch watched her husband from their table, a prime piece of real estate at the edge of the dance floor. A gentle protective hand rested on the swell of her stomach, where their son, their first child, was sleeping. 7 months. It felt like a lifetime, and no time at all. She wore a deep emerald gown by Valentino, the silk whispering over her changed form. She had never felt more beautiful or more fragile. Alistair was a supernova. At 42, he had the raw, restless energy of a man half his age, tempered by the predatory stillness of a CEO who'd built his empire, Finch Dynamics, from a garage startup into a global tech behemoth. He moved through the crowd like a shark, all charming smiles and firm handshakes, his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit a second skin. He was hers. The world knew it. But lately, a small, cold worm of doubt had begun to burrow into the core of her certainty. It was the little things, the late-night calls he'd take in his study. The door clicked softly shut, the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers clinging faintly to his collar. The way his thumb would ghost over his phone screen, an almost imperceptible hesitation, before he put it away when she entered a room. When she'd asked, he'd laughed a deep, reassuring sound that almost worked. "Ellie, darling," he'd said, kissing her forehead. Paranoid and pregnant. "It's adorable. The only woman on my mind is you. And this little guy, of course." Tonight, the worm of doubt was feasting. She saw her. Across the room, standing near the silent auction displays, was a woman in a crimson dress, so audacious it was practically a declaration of war. It clung to a figure that was all sharp angles and sinuous curves. Her hair was a sheet of polished obsidian, and her smile, as she schmoozed with a senator, was sharp enough to cut glass. Cassandra Thorne, Vice President of Strategic Communications for a rival firm. Ellie knew of her by reputation, brilliant, ruthless, and utterly magnetic. She'd seen Alistair with her once a month ago at a business lunch. A necessary evil, he'd called the meeting. But Ellie had seen the way Cassandra had leaned in her hand, resting on Alistair's forearm, for a fraction of a second too long. She'd seen the way Alistair hadn't pulled away. Now their eyes met across the glittering expanse. Cassandra's gaze held a flicker of something triumphant, a knowing smirk that was gone as quickly as it appeared. Ellie felt a chill, a primal warning that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "He's a wonder, isn't he?" A voice beside her made her jump. It was Beatrice Vanderkamp, a society matron whose face was a testament to the marvels of modern surgery. "He is," Ellie agreed, forcing a smile. "And you, my dear, are glowing. Positively radiant. Beatrice cooed her eyes, however darting towards Alistair. He's about to give his speech. The man of the hour. Indeed, the master of ceremonies was at the lectern, his voice booming through the sound system. A man whose vision is matched only by his generosity. Please welcome the recipient of this year's Crystal Legacy Award, the founder and CEO of Finch Dynamics, Mr. Alistair Finch. A wave of thunderous applause washed over the hall. Alistair, looking humbled and powerful all at once, ascended the few steps to the stage. He kissed the MC's wife on the cheek, shook his hand, and stepped up to the microphone. The lights dimmed slightly, focusing a brilliant white spotlight on him. He was magnificent. He spoke of innovation, of responsibility, of the future. He spoke of creating a legacy, and as he said the word, his eyes found Ellie's in the crowd. He smiled a genuine, warm smile that for a moment made the cold worm in her stomach die. He was talking about them, about their child, their future. This legacy, Alistair said, his voice resonating with emotion, is not mine alone. It is built on the foundation of a partnership with my brilliant, beautiful wife, Eleonora. He gestured to her, and the applause swelled again. A hot blush of pride and relief crept up Ellie's neck. She was being foolish, paranoid, and pregnant. Alistair was wrapping up. So I thank you for this incredible honor. It is a reminder that what we build is not for ourselves, but for the generations to come. And then it happened. From the side of the stage, a flash of crimson moved. It was Cassandra Thorne. She walked with a predator's unhurried grace straight towards the circle of light. A few people murmured, assuming she was part of the presentation, perhaps bringing him the physical award. Alistair looked momentarily confused, his speech faltering. She didn't stop until she was standing directly in front of him. The entire hall held its breath. The silence was absolute, broken only by the click-whir of a few press cameras. With a devastatingly confident smile, Cassandra reached up, not with an award, but with her hands. She made a show of straightening his perfectly straight tie, her fingers brushing his chest. She leaned in and whispered something only he could hear. Alistair's face went rigid. Then she rose on her toes, cupped his face in her hands, and kissed him. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. It was a deep, possessive, soul-stealing kiss right there on stage in the blinding spotlight in front of 500 of New York's most influential people. In front of his wife. The camera flashes erupted a violent, strobing frenzy of light, capturing every damning second. The worm in Ellie's stomach was gone. In its place, a dragon of ice and fire uncoiled. The curated air suddenly felt thin, unbreathable. The crystal chandeliers seemed to mock her, their light, cold, and cruel. The world, her world, had just cracked down the middle. Time seemed to warp, to stretch, and snap back like cheap elastic. The kiss ended, but the image was seared onto the back of Ellie's eyelids. Cassandra's crimson-stained lips, pulling away from her husband's, a single glistening strand of saliva connecting them for a horrifying instant before it broke. Alistair shoved her away. It was a clumsy, delayed reaction, the movement of a man whose brain was struggling to catch up with a catastrophe. His face was a mask of shock and abject panic. He looked out at the sea of faces, his eyes wide and searching, desperate. They landed on Ellie. The apology, the terror, the plea, it was all there. But it was too late. The betrayal had been broadcast in high definition. Cassandra, however, was a portrait of serene victory. She took a single step back, her expression not of a scorned lover, but of a CEO who had just successfully executed a hostile takeover. She gave a minute, almost imperceptible nod to someone in the crowd, then turned and walked off the stage with the same unhurried grace with which she had arrived, leaving Alistair alone in the spotlight with the smoking ruins of his life. A collective gasp rippled through the hall, followed by a frantic, buzzing murmur. Phones were out recording. Whispers turned to audible speculation. Beatrice Vanderkamp beside Ellie looked as if she'd seen a ghost. Ellie felt nothing. And then she felt everything. It wasn't the slow, crushing sadness she might have expected. It was a chemical reaction, a violent alchemy in her blood. The shock flash froze her heart, and then a wave of incandescent rage, pure and clean, as a laser melted it. The baby inside her gave a sudden sharp kick, as if in agreement. This will not stand. Her vision narrowed, the hundreds of gawking faces fading into a blurry periphery. There were only 3 points of focus left in her universe: the man on the stage, the crimson dress disappearing into the wings, and the sleek silver microphone on the lectern, still live, still waiting. Alistair started to stammer to salvage. Ladies and gentlemen, please, a misunderstanding. But no one was listening to him. They were all watching her. Ellie pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the polished floor. The sound cut through the din. She stood up. Her movements were not frantic or hysterical. They were deliberate, imbued with a preternatural calm that was far more terrifying than any outburst. She placed her napkin neatly on the table. "Ellie, don't." Alistair pleaded from the stage, his voice cracking the microphone, amplifying his pathetic desperation. She ignored him. Her gaze was fixed on the stage. She began to walk. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. The whispers died. The clicking of cameras paused. Every eye in the room followed the pregnant woman in the emerald green dress as she walked not to her husband's side to play the part of the supportive, humiliated wife, but straight towards the lectern. An event coordinator, a harried-looking man with a clipboard, moved to intercept her. "Mrs. Finch, perhaps we should—" Ellie didn't even look at him. She simply raised a hand, a gesture of regal dismissal that stopped him dead in his tracks. She reached the stage and ascended the steps, her heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm. She walked past Alistair as if he were a piece of furniture, her eyes never once acknowledging his existence. She reached the lectern, her hand steady and sure, wrapped around the cool metal of the microphone. She lifted it from its stand. She felt its weight, its power. She held the silence of the room in her palm. She brought it to her lips. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a shriek or a sob. It was clear, measured, and resonated with an Arctic chill that seemed to drop the temperature of the room by 20 degrees. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "Please don't stop your conversations on my account. I'm sure they're suddenly much more interesting." A nervous titter went through the crowd. Alistair looked like he was about to be physically ill. "My husband Alistair was just speaking about legacy." Ellie continued, her eyes scanning the room, making contact with one stunned face after another. "It's a word he's very fond of. Building a legacy. Leaving a legacy. The Finch legacy." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. "And I'd like to thank Ms. Thorne," she said, her voice dripping with venomous politeness, for her very public demonstration tonight. She has given us all a crystal-clear understanding of the kind of legacy Alistair is truly building, one based on deception, disrespect, and spectacular lapses in judgment. The room was so quiet, you could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. But here's a small detail about our partnership, about the foundation of Finch dynamics, that Alistair seems to have forgotten in his pursuit of other assets. Ellie's gaze was now a physical force, pinning the most powerful people in the city to their seats. When we married, my father, Robert Vance, a man most of you knew as Alistair's first and most significant mentor, did not just give me his blessing. He gave me his entire stake in this company. He placed it in a family trust of which I am the sole primary shareholder. A trust that, as of our wedding day, holds a 48% controlling interest in Finch Dynamics. A series of audible gasps swept the room. Board members at a table near the front exchanged panicked looks. Alistair's face had gone from pale to a ghastly, bloodless white. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, and saw not his gentle, loving wife, but a stranger, a queen, a judge. It was a wedding gift, Ellie said, a cruel, beautiful smile playing on her lips. A safety net. My father always said to protect your investments. It seems he was wiser than any of us knew. She took a breath, her hand coming to rest once more on her belly. Alistair spoke of the generations to come. And he's right. I am bringing the next generation of the Vance family, the majority shareholders of this company, into the world in 8 weeks. And I will not have my child's legacy, my father's legacy, tainted by this kind of tawdry, pathetic scandal. Her eyes finally settled on her husband. The ice in her gaze was enough to give a man frostbite. So effective immediately, I will be exercising my full rights as the controlling shareholder. I will be calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning to discuss the future leadership of this company. And as of this moment, consider this my official announcement that I will be filing for divorce. She looked out at the stunned audience one last time. Thank you for your time, and please enjoy the salmon. With that, she let go of the microphone. It didn't clatter. It fell with a heavy, definitive thud, the sound echoing through the silent hall like a gunshot. The sound of an ending, and a beginning. Ellie turned, and without a backward glance at the man she had just publicly castrated, she walked off the stage, through the parted crowd, and out of the grand hall. Her head held high, leaving absolute chaos in her wake. The doors of the St. Regis closed behind Ellie, muffling the explosion of noise she had detonated. The cool night air hit her face, a welcome shock after the suffocating atmosphere of the gala. For a moment, she leaned against the cold stone of the building, the adrenaline that had propelled her through the last 10 minutes beginning to ebb, leaving a vast, hollow emptiness in its wake. The dragon of rage was sated for now, replaced by a profound, seismic tremor of grief. Her marriage was over. The man she loved, or the man she thought she loved, was a phantom. A doorman rushed to her side. "Mrs. Finch, are you all right? Shall I get your car?" "Yes, thank you, Daniel," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She would not fall apart on a Manhattan sidewalk. The black Bentley purred to the curb. As she got in her phone, which she'd left on the table, began to scream. It was Alistair. She looked at his name on the screen, a name that had once made her heart leap, and felt a wave of nausea. She declined the call. He called again. Declined. A text message appeared. "Ellie, please, we have to talk." It's not what it looked like. She laughed, a short, bitter, humorless sound. Not what it looked like. It was precisely what it looked like. A public, flagrant act of infidelity. She powered the phone off and dropped it into her clutch, as if it were contaminated. The drive to their Fifth Avenue penthouse, the home she had so lovingly decorated, felt like a journey to a foreign land. Every landmark, every familiar street corner, seemed to mock her with memories of a life that was now a lie. Back at the St. Regis, Alistair Finch was in hell. The moment Ellie left the room had erupted. Reporters who had been cordoned off broke through the velvet ropes, shouting questions, their cameras flashing in his face. "Mr. Finch, is it true your wife controls the company?" "A comment on the affair, sir." "What will this do to your stock price?" His board members, a gaggle of grim-faced men in tuxedos, surrounded him. "Alistair, what in God's name was that?" demanded Marcus Thorne, the chairman, no relation to Cassandra, a fact that was of little comfort now. A 48% trust. Why were we never made aware of the specifics of this arrangement? "It was symbolic," Alistair choked out, running a hand through his hair. "A family thing. I never thought she would." "Use it." He couldn't even finish the sentence. He had underestimated her. He had mistaken her quiet grace for weakness, her love for pliability. It was the single greatest miscalculation of his life. He saw Cassandra being cornered by security near an exit. She looked frantic, her triumphant composure shattered. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. A public spat, a messy divorce, maybe a small dip in the stock that was the plan. Not this, not a public execution where the victim's wife seized the guillotine. Their eyes met, and in her panicked expression, he saw not a passionate lover, but an accomplice in his own destruction. He turned away from her in disgust. By the time Alistair made it home hours later, the storm had broken online. Finch Gala Showdown was the #1 trending topic worldwide. News sites had the video of the kiss and Ellie's speech on a continuous loop. Financial analysts were predicting a bloodbath when the markets opened. Finch Dynamics. The titan of the industry was suddenly vulnerable, bleeding, and circling sharks were beginning to smell it. He found the penthouse dark and silent. Half of Ellie's clothes were gone from the closet. Her jewelry box was empty. A framed photo of them on their wedding day lay face down on her bedside table. It was a declaration more final than any spoken word. He slumped onto the bed, the reality of his loss crashing down on him. It wasn't just the company. It was Ellie. The warmth she brought to his life, the way she could gently deflate his ego with a single witty remark, the quiet joy on her face when she'd told him she was pregnant. He had shattered it all for a cheap thrill, for the intoxicating vanity of being desired by a woman like Cassandra Thorne. Meanwhile, Ellie wasn't at her mother's as Alistair might have assumed. She was in a suite at the Carlisle, a place of quiet old-world discretion. The first person she called was not her mother, but her father's lawyer, a shrewd 70-year-old man named Samuel Blackwood. "Samuel, it's Eleanora Finch." "Ellie," he said, his voice instantly alert. "I saw the news. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Samuel. In fact, I've never been more clear-headed. I need you to assemble our legal team. And I need you to pull every document related to the Vance Family Trust, every clause, every bylaw. I want to know exactly what kind of power I'm holding." "I have them right here," Samuel said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Your father was a brilliant man, Ellie. He always said Alistair's ambition was a rocket, but he wanted to make sure you held the launch codes. The trust gives you more than just voting power. You have the right to veto any merger or acquisition, to approve any new board appointments, and most critically to call for a vote of no confidence in the CEO for actions detrimental to the company's reputation and financial stability." Ellie felt a grim smile touch her lips. Actions detrimental to the company's reputation. Her father had seen this coming. He had known Alistair perhaps better than she ever had. This wasn't just a safety net. It was a weapon. The second twist was unfolding a story buried in old legal documents and the quiet wisdom of a dead man. Robert Vance hadn't just been Alistair's mentor. He had been his silent partner, providing the seed money and the initial crucial connections that got Finch Dynamics off the ground. Alistair had rewritten history, casting himself as the lone, self-made genius. The trust wasn't a gift. It was a reclamation. It was Robert Vance, ensuring his daughter would always hold the reins of the empire he helped build. As Ellie and Samuel planned their strategy, another meeting was taking place in a sleek, minimalist office overlooking Central Park. Cassandra Thorne stood before Julian Croft, the CEO of rival tech firm Etheria. Croft was a man with a reptilian smile and eyes that were cold and dead. "That was not the plan, Cassandra," he hissed, throwing a tablet onto his desk. The screen showed an article, "Eleonora's Empire, the woman who now controls Finch Dynamics." The goal was to destabilize him, to make him a pariah, so we could initiate a takeover bid when the stock crashes, Croft spat. The goal was not to turn his mousy wife into Joan of Arc. You were supposed to create a liability, not a martyr queen. "I didn't know about the trust," Cassandra insisted, her voice trembling slightly. The power she thought she was seizing had vanished. "No one did. He told me she was nothing, just an accessory." "Well, you were wrong, and your mistake may have cost me billions," Croft said, his voice dangerously low. "Your usefulness is at an end. Get out." Cassandra stared at him, horrified. The senior position, the payoff, the power, it was all evaporating. She had lit a match to Alistair Finch's life, and now she was being burned by the same fire. She had been a pawn in a game far larger than she'd ever imagined, and she had just been sacrificed. The sun rose over New York City, casting long shadows. For Alistair, it was the dawn of a nightmare. For Cassandra, the beginning of her fall. But for Eleanora Vance Finch, sitting in her suite at the Carlyle, with a team of lawyers and a pot of black coffee, it was the dawn of her reign. The battle had just begun. The days that followed the gala were a brutal education for Alistair Finch. The stock of Finch Dynamics didn't just dip, it plummeted. It fell nearly 40% in 72 hours, wiping out billions in market value. The financial world, which had once worshipped his Midas touch, now treated him like a leper. He was trapped in a gilded haunt of his own, making the penthouse feeling less like a home and more like a prison. His attempts to reach Ellie were met with a wall of impenetrable silence. Dozens of calls went to voicemail, his texts, ranging from desperate apologies to furious demands, remained unread. He sent a small forest's worth of flowers to her mother's estate, only to be informed by a frosty housekeeper that Mrs. Finch was not in residence and all deliveries were being refused. He was an island, and the tide was rising. Humiliation was a foreign country to Alistair, and he was an unwelcome tourist. He was a man accustomed to fixing problems with money, power, or charm. But this problem was different. This problem had a name, Eleonora, and she was immune to all three. The realization that he had not only lost her, but had fundamentally misunderstood her, was the most bitter pill to swallow. He had seen her as a beautiful, gentle counterpart to his ambition, the soft place for his hard world to land. He never bothered to look at the steel in her spine. Ellie, meanwhile, was operating with the cool, methodical precision of a field marshal. The suite at the Carlyle had been transformed into a war room. Armed with Samuel Blackwood's legal team and a newfound ferocious sense of purpose, she dissected the architecture of the company she now controlled. She spent 16 hours a day in meetings, on calls, absorbing decades of financial reports, personnel files, and strategic plans. The quiet art historian was gone, replaced by a formidable corporate mind. It turned out she had inherited more than just her father's shares. She had inherited his acumen. She learned of Julian Croft's shadow war against Finch Dynamics, the subtle market manipulations, the poaching of key talent, the carefully planted negative press. And she learned through a private investigator Samuel had hired of Cassandra Thorne's role as a corporate saboteur. The investigator uncovered encrypted emails and offshore payments linking Cassandra directly to Etheria. The kiss had not been an act of passion or even ambition. It was a contracted hit job. The knowledge didn't hurt Ellie. It hardened her. It scrubbed away the last lingering vestiges of personal pain and replaced them with cold, strategic anger. This was no longer just about a cheating husband. This was about defending her father's legacy from jackals. 1 week after the gala, the emergency board meeting was called. It was held in the cavernous, intimidating boardroom on the top floor of the Finch Dynamics Tower. The long, polished mahogany table felt like a battlefield. Alistair was there looking hollowed out, a ghost in his own kingdom. The board members, 10 men and 1 woman, sat with grim, anxious expressions. At the far end of the table sat Julian Croft and his legal team invited as observers, circling like vultures ready to present their hostile takeover bid the moment the company was officially leaderless. Next to them, looking small and pale, was Cassandra Thorne. Croft had dragged her there as a final, cruel display of her failure. The doors opened, and Ellie entered. The room fell silent. She was not the same woman from the gala. She wore a bespoke power suit in a shade of deep charcoal grey that made her emerald eyes seem to flash. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She exuded an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. She did not look at Alistair. Her eyes swept over the board, lingered for a cold moment on Julian Croft, and then she took her seat at the head of the table, her father's seat. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen." She began, her voice calm and commanding. "Thank you for coming. We are here to discuss the future of this company, a future that, due to recent events, has been placed in severe jeopardy." Marcus Thorne, the chairman, cleared his throat. "Eleonora, Mrs. Finch, we have received a preliminary takeover offer from Mr. Croft and Etheria. Given the instability of the stock and the leadership crisis, it's an offer we are legally obligated to consider." An offer predicated on a crisis of his own making, Ellie countered smoothly. She gestured to Samuel Blackwood, who began distributing a file to each board member. "In this file you will find evidence of a concerted effort by Etheria to sabotage Finch Dynamics. You'll find proof of payments made to Ms. Thorne, who is present today for the explicit purpose of manufacturing a scandal to devalue our company." Cassandra flinched as if struck. Julian Croft's reptilian smile flickered for the first time. Ellie continued, her voice relentless. "Mr. Croft's offer isn't a rescue. It's the final move in a game of corporate espionage. He didn't count on the fact that the company he was trying to cripple was not owned by the man he was targeting, but by me." She let that sink in. "And I have no intention of allowing my father's work to be devoured by a snake." She then played her masterstroke. "For the past week, I have not been idle. While Mr. Croft was planning his victory party, I was on the phone. I have been in contact with private equity firms and allied investors who knew and respected my father. I have leveraged my personal wealth and the full assets of the Vance family to secure enough capital to not only stabilize our stock price, but to initiate a massive buyback program. Furthermore, I have secured proxy votes from enough wavering shareholders to definitively block any hostile takeover. Etheria's bid is dead on arrival." A stunned silence filled the room. Julian Croft's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed at his own game by a woman he'd dismissed as a decorative wife. "However," Ellie said, turning her attention to the board, "this does not solve our core problem. The market has lost faith in our leadership. The brand is damaged. A change is necessary." Her eyes for the first time moved to Alistair. He looked up at her, a desperate, pleading expression on his face. He saw not a hint of mercy. "The bylaws of the Vance Family Trust, which I have distributed, grant me the power to call for a vote of no confidence in the CEO. I am now formally exercising that power. I call for a vote on the immediate removal of Alistair Finch as Chief Executive Officer of Finch Dynamics." It was a public execution delivered with surgical precision. "All those in favor?" Ellie asked, her voice like steel. One by one, hands went up around the table. Marcus Thorne. The others. It was unanimous. The board, seeing a path to survival, had abandoned its creator. Alistair slumped in his chair, a broken man. It was over. "The motion carries," Ellie announced, her tone flat, devoid of triumph. "Alistair Finch is removed as CEO, effective immediately. I will be stepping in as interim chairwoman of the board to oversee the transition and begin the search for a new chief executive. This meeting is adjourned." She stood up. She had won. She had saved her father's company. She had avenged her own betrayal. As she walked out of the boardroom, she passed Julian Croft, who glared at her with pure hatred. She met his gaze and gave him a smile that was all ice. She passed Cassandra, who was staring at the table, her career and reputation in ashes. And finally she passed Alistair's chair. She didn't look down. She just kept walking, leaving the wreckage of 3 lives in her wake as she went to build her own. 3 months later, the world of Finch Dynamics was a different place. The panic had subsided, replaced by a steady, confident hum of activity. The stock had rebounded, stabilized by the buyback program, and the market's growing confidence in its new, unexpected leader. Eleonora Vance Finch, she had legally dropped her husband's name, was no longer the interim chairwoman. The board, impressed by her sharp instincts and ruthless efficiency, had made the position permanent. She was a natural. She governed with a quiet authority that commanded more respect than Alistair's bombastic charm ever had. She trimmed the fat-cut, wasteful vanity projects and refocused the company on its core principles of innovation and quality, the principles her father had instilled from the beginning. She was not just protecting a legacy, she was redefining it. Her office, the one that had been Alistair's, was transformed. The cold, modern art was replaced with warm, impressionist landscapes. The massive, intimidating desk was swapped for a collaborative round table, and in the corner near the window overlooking the city was a beautiful handcrafted bassinet waiting. At nearly 9 months pregnant, Ellie was more radiant than ever. The fragility was gone, replaced by a deep, grounded strength. She moved through the world with the unshakable certainty of a woman who had faced the worst and had not only survived but thrived. Alistair, in contrast, was a man adrift. Stripped of his title and his identity, he had retreated from the world. He sold his sports cars, his bachelor properties. He spent his days walking aimlessly through the city, a ghost haunting the streets where he was once a king. The scandal had made him a pariah. The loss of Ellie and his unborn child had hollowed him out. He had finally understood the difference between what he had and what he'd had. He'd had a kingdom, but what he'd lost was his home. One crisp autumn afternoon, he did the one thing he hadn't yet dared to do. He went to the Finch Dynamics Tower. He didn't have an appointment. He simply stood in the lobby until Ellie's assistant, recognizing him, nervously called upstairs. To his surprise, Ellie agreed to see him. He was led up to the office he had once occupied. Seeing her there behind that new table, her hand resting on her huge belly, was like a physical blow. She was powerful, serene, complete. Everything he was not. "Eleonora," he said, his voice raspy. "Alistair," she replied, her tone polite, neutral. "Please sit." He sat feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. The silence stretched between them, filled with the ghosts of everything they had been. "I didn't come to talk about the company," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Or the money. I know that's all gone. I came to apologize. Not the pathetic excuses I sent in texts. A real apology." He looked at her, his eyes raw with a pain she had never seen in him before. The arrogance was gone, burned away by the fires of his own making. "I destroyed us, Ellie. I know that. I was arrogant and weak and a fool. I took the most precious thing in my life, you, our family, and I threw it away for nothing, for ego. I broke your heart, and I betrayed our son before he was even born. And I will live with that for the rest of my life. There is no excuse, there is only the fact that I did it. And I am sorry. So deeply, deeply sorry." Tears were streaming down his face, now unchecked. It was the most honest, most vulnerable she had ever seen him. Ellie listened, her expression unreadable. The part of her that had once loved him so fiercely felt a pang of the old ache. But it was like remembering a song from a long time ago. The melody was familiar, but the emotion was distant. "I don't hate you, Alistair," she said finally, her voice soft. "I don't have the energy for it. Hate is an investment, and you are no longer an asset in my life." The words were colder than any curse she could have leveled. "I'm not asking for you to take me back," he said quickly, wiping at his face. "I know that's impossible. The trust is broken forever. I'm begging for a chance to be his father. Let me be a part of his life. That's all I have left to ask for." Ellie was silent for a long time, looking out the window at the sprawling city below. This was the final decision, the last thread connecting their old life to the new one she was building. "He deserves a father," she said at last, turning back to him. "And you are his father. You will be a part of his life." A wave of profound relief washed over Alistair's face. "But it will be on my terms," she continued, her voice hardening with that familiar steel. "There will be schedules, boundaries. There will be no confusion for him about where home is. You will have a role, but you will not have a say. Do you understand?" "Yes," he whispered, nodding. "Anything. I understand." "Good," she said, her tone becoming brisk, the chairwoman returning. "My assistant will be in touch with your lawyer to work out the details." It was a dismissal. Alistair stood a man pardoned, but not freed. He looked at her one last time, this magnificent, strong woman who was carrying his son. The woman he had lost. "Thank you, Ellie," he said, and turned and walked out of the office, out of the company, out of her life. Ellie watched him go, then placed both hands on her belly, feeling the strong, steady movement of the new life within her. The story wasn't a fairy tale. There was no happy reunion, no simple forgiveness. The betrayal had left a scar that would never fully fade. But from the ashes of that fire, she had forged a new reality. She was a mother. She was a leader. She was the sole architect of her own future. and that was a legacy worth fighting for. Robert Robbie Vance II was born 2 weeks later on a Tuesday morning with a tuft of his mother's dark hair and a cry that seemed to shake the windows of the private maternity suite at Lenox Hill. Holding him for the first time, swaddled and impossibly small against her chest, Ellie felt the world recalibrate. The pain of Alistair's betrayal, the triumph of her corporate victory, the gnawing ache of loneliness, it all dissolved into an irrelevant, distant hum. Here in her arms was her legacy, her purpose, her true north. Every decision she had made since that night at the Gala, every ruthless move and sleepless night had led to this. To him. She was his protector now, and that was a role she would never abdicate. The first 6 weeks were a beautiful, chaotic blur of 2 a.m. Feedings whispered lullabies, and the strange, quiet joy of discovering this tiny new person. She had moved into a sprawling, sunlit apartment on Park Avenue, a space she had chosen and designed herself. It was a home, not a showroom filled with comfortable furniture shelves, overflowing with books and the scent of baby powder and fresh flowers. It was hers and Robbie's sanctuary. Balancing this new life with her old one was a high-wire act. One afternoon, during a tense video conference with the board regarding a new acquisition, Robbie began to fuss. Without missing a beat, Ellie muted her microphone, lifted him from his bassinet, and settled him on her shoulder, rocking him gently as she listened to the CFO's report. When it was her turn to speak, she unmuted and, with the quiet authority that now defined her, delivered a sharp, insightful analysis that ended the debate. The image of the powerful chairwoman, one hand holding a multi-billion-dollar company in her palm, and the other soothing her infant son, became a quiet legend within Finch Dynamics. Alistair kept his distance as per their legally binding agreement. His first visit was scheduled with the cold formality of a business negotiation. He arrived precisely on time, looking gaunt and nervous, a ghost of the titan he once was. He was dressed not in a Tom Ford power suit, but in simple slacks and a cashmere sweater that seemed too large for his diminished frame. He held a small, tastefully wrapped gift from Tiffany's. Ellie met him at the door, holding Robbie, who was awake and alert, his wide, dark eyes taking in the world. The sight of them together, mother and child, a perfect, impenetrable unit, seemed to wound Alistair anew. He saw the apartment behind her, not the cold, minimalist penthouse they had shared, but a place filled with warmth and life. Her life. A life that no longer had a space for him. "He's perfect," Alistair whispered, his eyes fixed on the baby's face, not daring to look at Ellie. "He is..." Ellie said, her voice, polite but distant. She did not invite him further than the grand art-filled entryway. This was not a social call. "May I?" Alistair asked, his hands trembling slightly as he reached out his gaze, a desperate plea. Ellie hesitated. Every protective instinct screamed at her to refuse to shield her son from the man who had caused them so much pain. But she had made a promise. This was the first test of their new reality. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, she carefully transferred the warm, wriggling bundle into his father's arms. The moment Robbie was in his arms, Alistair's composure shattered. A raw, broken sob escaped his lips. He cradled the baby with a desperate, almost painful tenderness, his tears falling onto the soft blue blanket. In that moment, he wasn't a disgraced CEO or a scorned husband. He was just a father, drowning in the magnitude of what he had almost lost completely. He looked down at the tiny, perfect face, a face that held echoes of his own. and saw the living embodiment of his failure and his only hope for redemption. Ellie watched her heart, a tangled knot of warring emotions. There was a flicker of pity for the broken man before her, a ghost of the love she once felt for him. But it was overshadowed by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. This man had broken her world. She would not let him break her son's. "You have 1 hour, Alistair," she said, her voice soft but firm, before turning and leaving him alone with his son in the entryway, the silent nanny watching from a discreet distance. The visits continued twice a week, always supervised, always on her terms. Alistair was a model of good behavior. He was quiet, respectful, and utterly devoted to Robbie during his allotted time. But as the weeks turned into months, a new twist began to emerge, not with a dramatic explosion, but with quiet, insidious pressure. Alistair started a campaign of gifts. It began subtly, a silver rattle from Asprey, a first edition of Goodnight Moon. But soon, the gifts became extravagant, ostentatious attempts to assert a presence and influence that went beyond simply holding his son. A miniature, fully electric Aston Martin for a 2-month-old. A trust fund established in Robbie's name with a shocking number of zeros. A renowned child development specialist he'd hired just for a consultation. Each gift was a chess move, a proxy for the power he no longer wielded, an attempt to buy back a piece of the life he'd forfeited. Ellie refused them all, sending them back with polite, formal notes from her assistant. The confrontation came to a head when Alistair had a team of designers arrive unannounced to present plans for a state-of-the-art custom-built nursery. She met him in the lobby of her building that evening. "This stops now, Alistair," she said, her voice low and furious. "I'm just trying to provide for him, Ellie." He argued, a hint of the old entitled frustration creeping back into his voice. "To give him the best of everything." "I am giving him the best," she retorted, her voice like ice. "He is the majority shareholder of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. His financial future is secure because of my father and because of my actions. What he needs from you is character, not cash. He needs a father, not a financier. You are trying to buy your way back into a life you burned to the ground. Let me be perfectly clear. My son is not for sale." The battle lines were being redrawn. The war for the company was over, but the war for their son's soul, for his values, was just beginning. It wouldn't be fought in a boardroom, but in a nursery, with every visit, every decision, every attempt by Alistair to reclaim the power he had so spectacularly lost. Rebuffed Alistair changed tactics. He couldn't buy his son, but perhaps he could co-opt his legacy. A week later, a press release announced the formation of the Alistair Finch and Robert Vance II Foundation for Pediatric Health. With an initial endowment of $50 million, it was a brilliant, cynical move. It publicly tied his name to his son's, wrapping his disgraced reputation in the unimpeachable veil of children's charity. It put Ellie in an impossible position to challenge. It would be to look like she was obstructing a noble cause. Ellie saw it for what it was, a hostile takeover of her son's identity. She knew she had to be vigilant. Alistair had mistaken her love for weakness once. She would never let him make the mistake of misjudging her as a mother. Her father had left her a trust to protect his legacy. She would have to become the trust that protected her son's. In the end, this wasn't just a story of betrayal. It was a story of rebirth. Eleanora Vance Finch lost a husband, but she found herself. She discovered a strength she never knew she had, transforming from a society wife into a titan of industry, all while preparing to become a mother. She proved that the deepest betrayals can sometimes forge the strongest wills. Her story is a powerful reminder that we have the power to rewrite our own legacies, even when someone else tries to burn the pages. The whisper of silk, the glint of a diamond, the sweet scent of impending fatherhood. Amelia had orchestrated the perfect surprise. A gift not just of luxury, but of love sent to her husband's gleaming corporate office. It was a testament to their shared future, a future she carried gently within her. But in the sterile air of that high-rise, another woman's hands adorned with rings he'd also bought would tear open the carefully wrapped package. The scream that followed wasn't one of delight. It was a sound that would shatter the pristine facade of their perfect life, exposing a web of deceit so intricate that the truth would be the most devastating blow of all. Amelia traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. From the 35th floor of their penthouse apartment, the city sprawled beneath her like a glittering tapestry, a world she and Julian had conquered together. Or rather, a world Julian had conquered and she had graciously adorned. Her reflection in the panoramic window showed a woman who had everything a husband whose name echoed in the halls of finance, a home that graced the covers of architectural magazines, and a baby, their baby nestled safely in her womb. She was 6 months along the gentle swell of her stomach, a constant, wondrous reminder of the new life she was nurturing. This pregnancy, a hard-won miracle after years of quiet heartbreak, had cemented what she believed to be an unbreakable bond with Julian. He had been ecstatic, his usual cool demeanor melting away to reveal a man of surprising tenderness. He'd ordered a custom-built crib from a bespoke furniture maker in Italy, filled a room with every conceivable baby gadget, and massaged her swollen ankles every night with a devotion that brought tears to her eyes. Julian was a man of grand gestures. Their life was a testament to it. Their wedding had been a week-long affair on the Amalfi Coast. Her birthdays were marked by surprise trips to Paris or the acquisition of a rare piece of art. He'd once bought out an entire Michelin-starred restaurant for a private dinner, simply because she'd mentioned a craving for their truffle pasta. He called her his queen, his everything. And Amelia, swept away by the sheer force of his affection and the dazzling world he provided, had believed it. Every single word. Today was the anniversary of the day they'd first met. A detail she was sure Julian, in his whirlwind of meetings and multi-million-dollar deals, had forgotten. But Amelia hadn't. She cherished these small, intimate milestones. They were the invisible threads that wove their grand love story together. To commemorate it, she had planned a surprise that was both deeply personal and a nod to the life he so meticulously curated. She had commissioned a one-of-a-kind timepiece, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, with a secret inscription on the back. It wasn't a flamboyant, diamond-encrusted model. It was classic, elegant, timeless. Everything she felt their love was. The inscription was a line from a poem they'd both loved in college, a poignant reminder of their humbler beginnings before the towering skyscrapers and private jets. My soul, your soul, 2 stars in the same sky. But the watch was only part of the gift. Tucked inside the luxurious, lacquered box was a small, silver-plated frame. Inside it wasn't a photo of them, but the first sonogram picture of their baby, the tiny, grainy image that had made Julian weep with joy. And beside it, a handwritten note on her thick, cream-colored stationery. My dearest Julian, remember the starry nights on that rusty fire escape, dreaming of a future we could barely imagine today on the anniversary of our first hello. I wanted to give you something to remind you that even in our dazzling sky, some stars shine just for us. This little one is our newest star. I love you more than words can say. Happy anniversary. Forever yours, Amelia. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. It was perfect. She had arranged for a premium courier service, the kind that handled priceless art and sensitive tournaments, to deliver it to his office at precisely 3 p.m. She imagined his surprise, his colleagues catching a glimpse of the devoted family man behind the ruthless CEO. She pictured him calling her, his voice thick with emotion, thanking her for remembering, for loving him so completely. The courier, a man in a crisp uniform, arrived exactly on time. He handled the elegantly wrapped package with the reverence it deserved. Amelia gave him the address. Sterling Whitcroft Holdings, 48th floor, 1 Vanderbilt, Manhattan. The name of the building itself was a symbol of power and prestige, a fitting stage for her grand romantic gesture. Please ensure this is handed directly to Mr. Julian Croft, she instructed, pressing a generous tip into the courier's hand. It's of immense personal value. Of course, Mrs. Croft. It will be delivered with the utmost care. As the door clicked shut, a wave of contentment washed over her. She settled onto the plush velvet sofa, picking up a book on motherhood. The afternoon sun streamed in, casting a warm glow on the pages. For the next hour, she was lost in a world of feeding schedules and developmental milestones, her heart full of a quiet, unshakable joy. She was Amelia Croft, the cherished wife of a brilliant man, soon to be the mother of his child. Her world was perfect, secure, and shimmering with love. The scream that would tear it all apart was still hours away, an impossible sound in a life so meticulously soundproofed from reality. Julian's office was an extension of his personality, sleek, modern, and intimidating. Glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, but the real power was inside the room. A massive mahogany desk, an array of monitors displaying fluctuating market data, and a collection of abstract art that was both expensive and emotionally distant. It was a space designed to communicate dominance. His executive assistant, a woman in her late 50s with a stern but efficient demeanor, guarded the entrance to this inner sanctum like a hawk. She vetted his calls, managed his impossible schedule, and could spot a sycophant from a mile away. Her name was Margaret, and she was fiercely loyal to Julian. She was also, Amelia knew, fond of her. Margaret often commented on how Amelia was a calming influence on her demanding boss. When the courier arrived at the 48th floor, it was Margaret he met. A package for Mr. Julian Croft, the courier announced, presenting the beautifully wrapped box. Personal delivery. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. It wasn't unusual for gifts to arrive, but this had a different feel. It was elegant, personal, not the usual ostentatious corporate gift basket. She recognized the expensive wrapping paper, the same kind Amelia had used for Julian's last birthday gift. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "Thank you. I'll see that he gets it," she said, signing the electronic pad. She carried the gift towards Julian's office, her heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor. The glass door was slightly ajar, and she could hear voices from within. Julian's deep, confident tone and a lighter, feminine laugh that was decidedly not Amelia's. Margaret paused. This was the delicate part of her job, the part she hated, the part where she had to navigate the other side of Julian Croft's life, the side that Amelia in her gilded cage knew nothing about. The laugh belonged to Cassandra. Cassandra was a senior analyst in the mergers and acquisitions department. She was whip-smart, ambitious, and stunningly beautiful in a way that was the polar opposite of Amelia's classic elegance. Where Amelia was soft curves and gentle smiles, Cassandra was sharp angles and a predatory gaze. She had raven black hair, cut in a severe, stylish bob, and a wardrobe of form-fitting dresses that were just on the edge of office-appropriate. She was a shark in a sea of sharks, and she had set her sights on Julian Croft from the day she'd walked into the firm. Margaret had seen it all unfold. The late-night strategy sessions, the business trips that coincidentally involved a layover in a romantic city, the lingering touches and shared glances that crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with stock prices. She despised Cassandra, not just for the blatant affair, but for the danger she posed to the kind, unsuspecting woman who was carrying Julian's child. She could hear their conversation more clearly now. "The deal is sealed. We'll announce the acquisition on Monday," Julian was saying. "We should celebrate." Cassandra purred, her voice dripping with suggestion. "My place tonight. I'll open that bottle of single malt you like." "I can't tonight, Cass. Amelia is—" He trailed off, but Margaret could fill in the blank. "Amelia is pregnant. Amelia is waiting for me at home." "Right." The little wifey Cassandra's tone was laced with a derision she barely tried to conceal. "How is she, by the way?" Still enjoying her life as a professional lunch-goer, Margaret's hand tightened on the package. The insult to Amelia was a physical blow. She despised this woman's cruelty. "Be nice." Julian's voice was firm, but it lacked real conviction. He never defended Amelia with the ferocity he used to defend a business deal. "I'm just saying," Cassandra continued, undeterred. "You're here closing the biggest deal of the year, a titan of the industry, and she's at home." "What, picking out nursery colours?" "It's a bit of a mismatch, don't you think?" Before Julian could respond, Margaret decided to make her presence known. She knocked sharply on the doorframe. "Julian. A personal delivery for you." Julian looked up, his expression shifting from one of intimate conspiracy to professional command in a split second. Cassandra, however, didn't bother to school her features. She shot Margaret a look of pure annoyance, angry at the interruption. "Bring it in." "Margaret," Julian said, gesturing towards his desk. As Margaret walked in, Cassandra's eyes landed on the gift. Her expression changed from annoyance to a covetous curiosity. It was clearly expensive, clearly personal, and in Cassandra's mind, anything personal and expensive belonging to Julian should by rights be related to her. "Ooh, what's this?" "An admirer?" she asked, stepping forward. She ran a perfectly manicured finger over the silk ribbon. "Let me guess. A gift from the board for closing the Henderson deal." "It's from my wife, Julian," said a little too quickly. He made a move to take the box, but Cassandra was faster. With a playful, possessive flick of her wrist, she snatched it from Margaret's grasp. "From Amelia." Cassandra's red lips curled into a smirk. "How sweet." "What did she get?" "Another set of monogrammed handkerchiefs." "Cassandra, give it to me." Julian's voice held a warning tone. This was a line he wasn't prepared to cross in front of his assistant. But Cassandra was fueled by arrogance and a desire to needle him, to assert her place in his life. She saw herself not as the mistress, but as his true partner, the one who understood his world of power and ambition. Amelia was just a domestic accessory. "Oh, don't be such a spoil sport." "Darling," she cooed, her voice loud enough for anyone passing in the hallway to hear. I want to see what perfect taste your perfect wife has. Let's open it together." And with that, before Julian or Margaret could react, Cassandra's sharp, blood-red nails tore into the elegant wrapping paper. She ripped it open with a careless, almost violent motion, a stark contrast to the love and care with which Amelia had wrapped it just hours before. The lid of the Patek Philippe box was revealed. Cassandra's eyes widened with genuine surprise and a flash of greed. "Well, well, Mrs. Croft has expensive taste," she murmured, lifting the heavy lid. The classic, understated beauty of the Calatrava gleamed up at them. For a moment there was silence. Julian stared, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Margaret held her breath, a sense of dread coiling in her stomach. And then Cassandra saw what was nestled beside the watch. She picked up the small silver frame. She tilted it towards the light. Her brow furrowed in confusion. And then she saw it, the grainy black-and-white image. The unmistakable shape of a fetus, her face a mask of triumphant arrogance, just seconds before contorted. The color drained from her cheeks, her crimson lips parted. And then she screamed. It wasn't a scream of surprise or delight. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated shock and horror. A sound of a carefully constructed reality, shattering into a million pieces. A sound that echoed through the glass-walled office out into the hushed professional quiet of the 48th floor. A primal cry of a secret blown wide open. The scream ripped through the sterile air of the 48th floor, sharp and visceral. It was a sound that didn't belong amidst the quiet hum of servers and the muted ringing of phones. Heads popped up over cubicle walls. The low murmur of business chatter ceased. In that one piercing moment, every eye on the floor was turned towards the glass-walled office of Julian Croft. Inside the scene was frozen. Julian stood, his face a ghastly shade of pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and panic. Margaret was rooted to the spot, her professional composure finally cracking as she stared at the unfolding disaster, and Cassandra was trembling. Her hand clapped over her mouth, as if to shove the scream back down her throat. Her other hand still held the silver frame, but her knuckles were white, her grip so tight it threatened to crush the delicate object. What is this?" she finally whispered, her voice a ragged, broken thing. She thrust the sonogram picture towards Julian, her eyes wild and accusing. "What is this?" "Julian!" Julian finally jolted into action, lunged forward and snatched the frame from her hand. He grabbed the watchbox, shoving the picture and the handwritten note back inside with clumsy, frantic movements. "Get out!" he hissed at Cassandra, his voice low and venomous. "Get out now!" But Cassandra wasn't listening. Her gaze was locked on his face, searching for an answer, a denial, anything. You told me you were leaving her. You said the marriage was just for appearances, a business arrangement." Her voice began to rise again, teetering on the edge of hysteria. "You don't have a baby with a business arrangement, Julian." I said. "Get out!" he roared, his voice finally exploding, echoing his earlier command, but now filled with raw, desperate anger. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh, and began to physically propel her towards the door. "Let go of me," she shrieked, struggling against his grip. "You lied to me. All this time you've been lying to me." The spectacle was now on full display for the entire senior management floor. Colleagues, rivals, and subordinates alike were staring, their faces a mixture of shock, fascination, and thinly veiled schadenfreude. The pristine facade of Julian Croft, The untouchable master of the universe was cracking right before their eyes. Margaret, her training kicking in, moved swiftly to the door. "Everything is fine," she announced in a firm, commanding voice to the gawking crowd. "Mr. Croft is handling a private matter. Please return to your work." She pulled the door shut, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the charged silence. She then turned back to the chaos within. Julian had managed to shove Cassandra out of his office, slamming the door behind her. He leaned against it, his chest heaving, his tie askew. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time Margaret had ever seen. He looked cornered, trapped. Through the glass wall they could see Cassandra stumbling back to her own desk, a trail of stunned and whispering colleagues in her wake. She collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent sobs. The damage was done. The secret was out. The carefully compartmentalized worlds of Julian Croft had just collided with the force of a nuclear explosion. Julian turned his eyes, finally landing on Margaret. His expression was one of pure fury, but it was the desperate fury of a man who has lost control. Not a word of this to anyone, Margaret, he seethed, especially not to Amelia. "Do you understand me?" Margaret met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. For years, she had been his loyal soldier, his gatekeeper, the silent facilitator of his double life. She had rationalized it as part of the job, a necessary evil in the high-stakes world they inhabited. But the sound of Cassandra's scream, the sight of that tiny sonogram picture, had shifted something within her. It was no longer an abstract indiscretion. It was a betrayal of a woman she respected, a woman who was blissfully awaiting the birth of her child. "She is going to call Julian." "Margaret," said her voice, steady and cool. "She is expecting you to thank her for your gift. What are you going to say?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Julian stared at the Patek Philippe box on his desk as if it were a venomous snake. The gift, meant to be a symbol of love and shared history, had become an instrument of his exposure. Amelia's perfect, heartfelt gesture had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. He snatched the box, opened it, and pulled out the handwritten note. He read Amelia's loving words, her reference to their shared past, her excitement for their future. His face, already pale, seemed to lose another shade of color. The sincerity of her love, the purity of her intentions, was a searing indictment of his own duplicity. "I'll handle it," he muttered, shoving the note into his pocket. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Amelia's contact photo, a picture of her smiling, radiant on a beach in the Maldives. He looked like a man about to walk to his own execution. Meanwhile, back in her sun-drenched penthouse, Amelia was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. It was now well past 4 p.m. She had expected a call from Julian almost immediately. He was usually so prompt, so effusive in his gratitude for her gifts. She pictured the scene in his office again, but this time a small, unwelcome detail crept in the press of his schedule, an important meeting he couldn't leave, a sudden market crisis demanding his attention. She reassured herself. He was a busy man. That was part of the package. He would call when he could. She tried to go back to her book, but the words blurred on the page. She checked her phone. No missed calls. No messages. She decided to call him. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. "You've reached Julian Croft. I'm unavailable at the moment. Please leave a message." This was unusual. Julian prided himself on his accessibility, at least to her. His phone was an extension of his hand. For him not to answer was strange. For him not to have called her by now was almost unheard of. A tiny seed of anxiety began to sprout in the fertile ground of her waiting. She told herself she was being silly, that the pregnancy hormones were making her oversensitive. She made herself another cup of herbal tea, the steam warming her hands, but not the chill that was beginning to creep into her heart. Back on the 48th floor, Julian was staring at his phone, watching Amelia's call go to voicemail. He couldn't talk to her. Not now. Not when the sound of Cassandra's scream was still ringing in his ears. What would he say? How could he possibly feign the delight and emotion she would be expecting? His voice would betray him. His guilt was a physical thing, a sour taste in his mouth. He looked at the gift box. He had to hide it. He couldn't take it home. Amelia would expect to see him wearing the watch. She would ask where he had put the picture frame. The entire gift was now radioactive, a piece of evidence in a crime he was desperate to conceal. He looked at Margaret, his eyes pleading. "I need you to what, Julian?" She cut him off, her tone sharp. "To lie for you, to clean up this mess. My job is to manage your schedule, not your infidelities." The insubordination was shocking, and they both knew it. But Margaret had reached her limit. Julian's face hardened. "You will do what I tell you to do, Margaret. Your loyalty is to me and to this company. Your very generous salary depends on it." The threat hung in the air, ugly and undisguised. Margaret stared back at him, a silent battle of wills playing out between them. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of complicity, she nodded. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice flat and devoid of its usual warmth. "Take this," he said, pushing the Patek Philippe box towards her. "Get it out of here. I don't care what you do with it. Sell it. Throw it in the Hudson River. Just make sure it disappears. And it never ever gets back to my wife." He then turned his attention to the more immediate problem, Cassandra. He strode out of his office, ignoring the renewed whispers and stares, and marched directly to her desk. "My office." "Now," he commanded. Cassandra, her face tear-streaked and blotchy, looked up at him with a mixture of hatred and heartbreak. She followed him back to his office, and he shut the door firmly behind them. "You have 5 minutes to pack your personal belongings," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. "Security will escort you from the building. Your severance package will be generous. But it is contingent on you signing a non-disclosure agreement, so comprehensive it will prevent you from even thinking my name." "Is that clear?" Cassandra stared at him aghast. "You're firing me." Her voice was a choked whisper. "After everything. After all your promises." "The promises were based on a discretion you have just proven incapable of," Julian retorted icily. "You created a scene. You disrupted the entire floor. You are a liability. The situation is over. You are over." The cruelty was breathtaking. The man who had whispered promises of a future together was now discarding her like a failed business venture. Cassandra's heartbreak curdled into a cold, hard rage. "You think you can just get rid of me," she hissed. "You think you can silence me with money. You have no idea who you're messing with, Julian. I know everything. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the Cayman deal. I know where all the bodies are buried. You may have fired me from your company, but you are not rid of me." She turned and walked out of his office, her head held high, leaving a stunned Julian in her wake. He had solved one problem by firing her, but he had just created a much, much bigger one. He had underestimated Cassandra's fury, and he had no idea just how far she would go to get her revenge. And miles away in the quiet luxury of her penthouse, Amelia looked at the clock. It was almost 5 p.m. The silence from her husband was no longer just strange. It was a screaming, gaping void that was starting to swallow her perfect world whole. She picked up her phone and dialed a different number. It was a number she rarely used, but one she knew by heart. It was Margaret's direct line at the office. "Margaret." "It's Amelia Croft," she said, trying to keep her voice light and casual. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've been trying to reach Julian. Is he in a meeting? I sent a package over earlier, and I just wanted to make sure he received it." On the other end of the line, Margaret closed her eyes. She held the heavy Patek Philippe box in her lap. The lie Julian wanted her to tell felt like poison on her tongue. But the threat to her livelihood, the years of ingrained loyalty, and a flicker of misguided pity for the man whose life was imploding, made her hesitate. "Yes, Mrs. Croft." Margaret began, her voice carefully neutral. "He's just been pulled into an emergency conference call with the London office. The market is very volatile today. He did ask me to tell you that he received your gift and he loves it. He said he would call you the second he is free." The lie was delivered, the first of many, and as Amelia hung up, a wave of relief washed over her, chasing away the earlier anxiety. Of course, a market crisis. It all made sense. She was being silly, oversensitive. Her Julian was just busy conquering the world. He loved her gift. Everything was fine. But Margaret, as she placed the phone back in its cradle, felt a profound sense of shame. She looked at the expensive box in her lap, the symbol of a pure love that had been so cruelly desecrated. She thought of the furious, vengeful woman who had just been fired and the kind, pregnant woman who had just been lied to. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this was far from over. This was just the beginning. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Julian returned home that evening, the very picture of the doting husband. He came bearing a bouquet of Amelia's favorite peonies and a story expertly crafted of a frantic day-long crisis involving a sudden currency devaluation that had threatened a major European acquisition. "I'm so sorry, my love," he said, enveloping her in a hug. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, his lips carefully avoiding hers. "I was chained to my desk all day." "Margaret told you I got your gift." Amelia melted into his embrace, her earlier anxieties seeming foolish and distant. "She did. I'm just glad everything is okay." "Did you like it?" she asked, her eyes searching his for the emotional response she had been anticipating all day. Julian's performance was flawless. He smiled a warm, crinkling smile that almost reached his eyes. "Liked it, Amelia?" I was speechless. "It's magnificent. The Calatrava, it's a work of art, and the inscription, it took me right back to that fire escape." He paused, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But the picture, that was the real gift. I almost lost it right there in front of the entire board. It was exactly what she had wanted to hear, the perfect reaction. Yet a tiny, almost imperceptible detail felt off." He spoke the words with practiced ease, but the genuine, soul-shaking emotion she had expected to see in his eyes wasn't quite there. It was like watching a brilliant actor play a part rather than witnessing a true, heartfelt reaction. But she dismissed the feeling as quickly as it came. He was tired. It had been a long, stressful day. "Where is it?" she asked, a playful smile on her face. "I expected you to come home wearing it." Julian didn't miss a beat. "Are you crazy?" "A Patek Philippe. That beautiful." I took one look at it and locked it straight in the office safe. "It's far too valuable to be worn every day, and especially not on a day as chaotic as today. I'd be terrified of scratching it. We'll take it out for our anniversary dinner on Saturday." It was a plausible, even sensible explanation. It was so Julian, protective of beautiful, expensive things. And so Amelia accepted it. She accepted his excuses, his carefully constructed narrative, the slight distance in his kiss. She wanted to believe him. Her entire world, the very foundation of her happiness, depended on it. Life returned to its glossy, perfect rhythm. Julian went to the office, Amelia attended her prenatal yoga classes, and oversaw the final touches on the nursery. They talked about baby names, debated the merits of different strollers, and planned a baby moon in the Seychelles. Julian was attentive, charming, and affectionate, but Amelia couldn't shake a subtle, persistent feeling of unease. It was in the small things. He started keeping his phone face down on the nightstand, something he'd never done before. He was more jumpy, a sudden noise making him flinch. He claimed it was the residual stress from the market crisis, but there was a furtive, hunted look in his eyes that she'd never seen before. He also began to work later, claiming the European acquisition required late-night calls and endless paperwork. He would come home long after she had gone to bed, slipping under the covers, with the cool silence of a ghost. A week after the incident, Amelia had a doctor's appointment. It was a routine checkup, and she'd asked Julian to come with her, hoping they could hear the baby's heartbeat together again. He had agreed enthusiastically, but on the morning of the appointment, he called, his voice strained. "Darling, I'm so sorry. I'm completely swamped. We're in the final stages of due diligence on the Henderson deal. I can't possibly get away." "The Henderson deal?" Amelia asked, confused. "I thought that was the deal that closed last week, the one that caused the big crisis." There was a fractional pause on the other end of the line. No. That was the precursor. This is the final, painstaking legal work. It's incredibly tedious. I promise I'll be at the next one. Get me a new picture of our little star. Okay." She hung up, a knot of disappointment tightening in her chest. She went to the appointment alone, sitting in the waiting room, surrounded by beaming couples. She listened to the strong, rhythmic thump of her baby's heart, a sound of profound joy that was now tinged with a lonely sadness. That afternoon, needing a distraction, she decided to do some shopping. As she browsed in a high-end baby boutique, her phone buzzed. It was an email notification. The subject line was blank. The sender was an address she didn't recognize, Karma. RSA bitch at protonmail.com. Curiosity piqued, she opened it. There was no text, just a single attachment, a video file. Hesitantly, she tapped to download it. It was short, only about 15 seconds long, and the quality was grainy, clearly filmed on a phone from a distance. The video showed a man and a woman standing outside a sleek, modern apartment building at night. They were arguing. The man was Julian. The woman was beautiful, with striking dark hair and a furious expression. Amelia's heart began to pound in her chest. She recognized the woman. She had seen her once or twice at company functions. Cassandra, an analyst from his firm. The audio was faint, but Amelia turned the volume all the way up, pressing the phone to her ear. "Can't just throw me away." Cassandra's voice was high and shrill. "The deal is done, Cassandra. It's over." Julian's voice was cold, dismissive. "Is it? Or are you just scared? Scared your perfect little wife will find out. Her perfect little life is a complete and utter lie. The video ended. Amelia stood frozen in the middle of the baby boutique, surrounded by soft pastels and cheerful animal motifs. The air left her lungs. A cold, terrifying dread, far worse than any anxiety she had felt before, washed over her. A lie. Her perfect life is a complete and utter lie. Her hands shaking, she stumbled out of the store, nearly colliding with another shopper. She hailed a taxi, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. An argument. It could be work-related. Cassandra had just been fired. Julian had told her for poor performance and a bad attitude. Maybe this was just the fallout from that. But Cassandra's words. Scared your perfect little wife will find out. The words echoed in her head, a venomous chorus. No, it wasn't possible. Julian loved her. He was the father of her child. They were building a life together. This woman, this Cassandra, was just a bitter, disgruntled ex-employee trying to cause trouble. That had to be it. But the seed of doubt once planted had taken root, and it was growing its thorny vines wrapping around her heart. When she got home, the penthouse felt different. It was no longer a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, a beautifully decorated set for a play in which she was the unknowing lead. She walked into Julian's home office, a space she rarely entered. It was as immaculate as ever. She ran her hand over his desk, her eyes scanning for, she didn't even know what. Her gaze fell upon his briefcase, which he had left by his chair. On a sudden, uncharacteristic impulse, she opened it. Inside were files, a laptop, a leather-bound notebook. She picked up the notebook. His handwriting, a sharp, decisive script, filled the pages. It was mostly meeting notes, market analysis numbers. And then she saw it. Tucked into a side pocket of the notebook was a receipt. A jewelry receipt dated 2 months ago. It was from Cartier. The item purchased a Trinity ring. Amelia's breath caught. The Trinity ring. 3 interlocking bands of gold, a symbol of love, fidelity, and friendship. It was a beautiful, romantic piece, and Julian had not given it to her. Her mind flashed back to the video, to Cassandra's hands gesturing angrily. She remembered seeing the glint of gold on her finger. 3 interlocking bands. The blood drained from Amelia's face. She sank into Julian's leather office chair, the receipt trembling in her hand. This wasn't a disgruntled employee. This was his mistress. The late nights, the business trips, the sudden distance. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The lie wasn't just in the video. The lie was her entire life. And then a worse thought, a thought so monstrous it made her feel physically ill. The gift. The Patek Philippe. The sonogram. The story about the office safe suddenly seemed laughably thin. The praise for the gift felt hollow, rehearsed. Why had he really hidden it? What had really happened that day? The pieces began to form a horrifying mosaic in her mind. The scream that Cassandra had let out in the video. It was a scream of shock. What if she hadn't been screaming at Julian in the street? What if she had screamed in his office? Amelia's mind raced back to the day she sent the gift. Her call to Margaret. Margaret's smooth, reassuring lie. He's in a conference call. He loves the gift. Margaret. Margaret would know. She was Julian's gatekeeper. She saw everything, heard everything. And despite her professional demeanor, Amelia had always felt a current of warmth from the older woman, a hint of sympathy. with a resolve she didn't know she possessed. Amelia stood up. The hurt, the betrayal. It was a physical weight threatening to crush her. But beneath it, something else was stirring. A cold, hard anger. She had been played for a fool. Her love, her pregnancy, her most sacred feelings had been used as props in his sordid drama. She would not be a victim. She would find out the truth. The whole truth. She picked up her phone and dialed Margaret's number again. This time there would be no polite inquiries. This time there would be no accepting easy lies. "Margaret," she said, when the assistant answered her voice dangerously quiet. "We need to talk. Not on the phone. In person. I'm coming to the office now." Before Margaret could protest, Amelia hung up. She walked into her bedroom, her movements stiff and robotic. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The soft, happy woman from a week ago was gone. In her place was a woman with haunted eyes and a grim, determined set to her mouth. She was a queen, just as Julian had always said, but a queen whose kingdom had been revealed to be built on lies, and she was about to go to war. The taxi ride to 1 Vanderbilt was a blur. The familiar Manhattan cityscape, once a symbol of her and Julian's shared success, now seemed hostile and alien. Every gleaming skyscraper felt like a monument to a lie. Amelia sat ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly over her baby bump, a protective, primal gesture. The naive, trusting woman, who had so lovingly sent a gift to her husband, was gone, incinerated in the fire of his betrayal. In her place was a woman, forged in cold fury, her mind whirring with a chilling clarity. She didn't go to the main entrance. She knew the protocol, the way visitors were announced, the chance that Julian would be alerted to her presence. Instead, she remembered a private entrance on the side street that led to a discreet elevator bank sold by the top executives. Margaret had pointed it out to her once. It was a small detail, a piece of insider knowledge, and she would use it. She was done playing by the rules of a game that had been rigged against her from the start. When she stepped out onto the 48th floor, the atmosphere was thick with a tension she could now finally understand. The whispers she might have once dismissed as office gossip now sounded like echoes of her own humiliation. She saw the sideways glances, the sudden silences as she walked past. They knew. They had all known. They had watched the drama unfold while she sat in her penthouse, blissfully ignorant. She walked directly to Margaret's desk, her gaze unwavering. The older woman looked up, her face pale. She saw the look in Amelia's eyes, and her professional mask crumbled. What she saw was not the gentle Mrs. Croft, but a woman on the verge of shattering, held together only by sheer force of will. "Mrs. Croft. Amelia, you shouldn't be here," Margaret stammered, standing up. "Don't, Amelia," said her voice low and steady, cutting through Margaret's flustered greeting. "Don't you dare lie to me again. Margaret, I know. I know about Cassandra. I know about the affair." Margaret's face fell. The years of carefully maintained composure dissolved into undisguised pity and regret. How she whispered. "That doesn't matter," Amelia said, her voice sharp. "What matters is what happened here last week. The day I sent the gift, I want you to tell me everything, every single detail. And if you value your conscience, you will not leave a single thing out." Julian was in a meeting in the main boardroom, a glass-walled enclosure in the center of the floor. He was visible to them, pacing, gesturing, commanding the room, completely unaware of the reckoning that was taking place just 50 feet away. Margaret hesitated, her eyes darting nervously towards Julian's office. Her loyalty, her job, her entire life was tied to that man. But then she looked back at Amelia. She saw the profound pain in her eyes, the slight tremble of her hands resting on her pregnant stomach. She thought of the beautiful, heartfelt gift and the ugly, violent way it had been desecrated. The lie she had told Amelia over the phone had been eating at her for a week. The guilt was a heavy, indigestible stone in her gut. "He made me get rid of it," Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper. Amelia's blood ran cold. "Get rid of what?" "The gift. The watch. The picture of your baby." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Cassandra was in his office when it arrived. She thought it was for her. She opened it, and she saw the sonogram. She screamed. The whole floor heard it. It was a disaster. The scene played out in Amelia's mind, a horrifying, vivid nightmare. The woman who was sleeping with her husband, her hands on the picture of their unborn child. The scream, the humiliation. It was infinitely worse than anything she could have imagined. And Julian. Amelia pressed her voice devoid of emotion. "What did he do?" "He fired her. Right on the spot. Then he gave me the box and told me to make it disappear. He was terrified you would find out." "Where is it now?" Amelia's question was like a shard of ice. Margaret swallowed hard. She reached down into the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, a drawer she had kept locked all week. She pulled out the Patek Philippe box and placed it on the desk between them. Amelia stared at it. The elegant wrapping paper was gone, replaced by the stark lacquered wood. It looked like a tiny coffin. With trembling fingers, she opened the lid. The magnificent watch was there, gleaming cold and unused. Beside it, tucked away, was the silver frame with the sonogram and her handwritten note. She picked up the note. "My soul, your soul. 2 stars in the same sky." The words, once a declaration of transcendent love, were now a bitter, mocking epitaph. A tear, hot and heavy, finally escaped her and splashed onto the expensive cream stationery, blurring the ink. She wiped the tear away with an angry gesture. This was not the time for weeping. This was the time for action. "Thank you, Margaret," she said, her voice regaining its strength. She closed the box. "You've done the right thing." She looked over at the glass boardroom. Julian's meeting was wrapping up. People were starting to stand, shaking hands. He would be out in minutes. Margaret Amelia said, a new chilling plan forming in her mind. "Does this company have a town hall meeting scheduled any time soon?" An all-hands meeting for the entire New York office. Margaret looked confused. "Yes, there's one this Friday. Julian is the keynote speaker. It's a big quarterly address." "Perfect," Amelia said. She gave Margaret a look of such intense, cold resolve that the older woman physically recoiled. "I want you to do one more thing for me. And this time, it's not for Julian. It's for me. And for every woman who has ever been made to feel like a fool." 2 days later, on Friday, the auditorium at Sterling Whitcroft Holdings was packed. Hundreds of employees, from fresh-faced interns to seasoned senior partners, filled the tiered seats. There was a buzz of anticipation in the air. The quarterly town hall was a major event, a chance to hear directly from the CEO. But today, the anticipation was laced with something else, gossip. The story of Cassandra's dramatic screaming exit and swift dismissal had spread like wildfire. Everyone knew something had happened, but the details were murky speculative. Julian Croft stood at the podium on the brightly lit stage, looking every inch the powerful, confident leader. He was dressed in a bespoke suit, his voice resonant and assured as he spoke about quarterly earnings, market projections, and the company's bright future. He was in his element, the master of his universe. The chaos of the previous week firmly behind him. He had dealt with Cassandra. He had placated Amelia. The storm had passed. He was just moving into his closing remarks, a rallying cry about integrity and teamwork, when the main doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. A figure was silhouetted in the doorway. It was a woman. As she walked down the central aisle, a stunned silence fell over the room. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people recognized her. It was Amelia Croft. She looked radiant, ethereal. She was wearing a simple but elegant white dress that accentuated her pregnancy. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She looked like an angel, an avenging angel. Julian stopped mid-sentence, his words dying in his throat. His face went ashen. He stared at her, his confident posture collapsing, a look of pure, unadulterated terror in his eyes. He knew in that instant that his world was about to end. Amelia didn't look at him. She walked calmly and deliberately towards the stage, her heels clicking with a steady, resolute rhythm on the floor. In her hands, she carried the Patek Philippe box. As she reached the short set of stairs leading to the stage, a few security guards started to move towards her, unsure of how to react. But Amelia simply gave them a serene, dismissive glance, and they stopped confused. She walked onto the stage and approached the podium, stopping directly in front of her husband. She could feel the collective gaze of hundreds of people on her, could hear the frantic whispering. She ignored it all. Her focus was entirely on Julian. She leaned into the microphone, her voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous room. "My husband," she began, her voice ringing with a strength no one in that room had ever heard from her, "is a man who speaks about integrity, about loyalty, about the values that make this company great." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Julian was frozen, paralyzed, a statue of a guilty man. "He is also a man of grand gestures," she continued, her voice gaining an edge. "And recently, to celebrate a personal milestone, the anniversary of the day we met, I decided to make a grand gesture of my own." She held up the lacquered box for the entire auditorium to see. The giant screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying stock charts, now showed a close-up of her face, her expression one of heartbreaking composure. "I bought him this," she said, her voice starting to tremble, but with rage, not weakness. "A Patek Philippe watch, a symbol of timeless love." But that wasn't the real gift. She opened the box and took out the small silver frame. She held it up. The camera zoomed in, and the grainy image of the sonogram filled the screens. A collective gasp went through the audience. "This was the real gift," she said, her voice breaking for a moment. "Our baby, our future." I sent it to his office, hoping to surprise him to share a moment of joy. She turned her gaze fully on Julian, her eyes locking with his. All the love she had ever felt for him was gone, replaced by a contempt so profound it was like a physical force. But I was not the only one who saw it. My husband's mistress, Cassandra Miller, a senior analyst he was sleeping with for over a year, opened it first. She saw the picture of my baby, the baby of the man who had promised to leave his wife for her, and she screamed. The auditorium erupted. The whispers turned into a roar of shock and scandal. This was better, more salacious than any rumor. This was a confession, a public crucifixion. He lied to me. Amelia's voice soared over the din filled with righteous fury. He fired his mistress to silence her. He took this beautiful gift, this symbol of our family, and he ordered it to be destroyed, to be hidden, so he could continue to live his lie. He stood in our home, looked me in the eye, and told me he loved it while secretly trying to erase its existence. She placed the sonogram picture on the podium, directly in front of Julian. Then she picked up the watch, the magnificent, priceless Patek Philippe Calatrava. My husband values beautiful, expensive things, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. He builds his life around them. He acquires them. He controls them. Women Company's watches. It's all the same to him. And then, in a move that no one could have predicted, she drew back her arm, and with all her strength, she threw the Patek Philippe watch across the stage. It hit the far wall with a sickening crack and clattered to the floor. Its delicate mechanism shattered its timeless beauty, destroyed in an instant. The sound echoed through the silent, stunned auditorium. Amelia turned back to the microphone, her face a mask of triumphant, heartbreaking resolve. The assets of this man of this company may be vast, she declared, her voice ringing with the authority of a queen who had just reclaimed her throne. But his integrity is bankrupt, his loyalty is worthless. And as for my assets, the shares in this company that I own in my own name, a very significant portion, I believe, they will be on the market by the end of the day. I believe the term is a hostile takeover. I'm sure you all, as experts in the field, know what that means. She looked one last time at the broken man who had been her husband. His face was slack with shock, his empire crumbling around him on a stage of his own making. Without another word, Amelia Croft turned and walked off the stage, her back straight, her head held high. She did not look back. She walked out of the auditorium, out of the building, and out of the life that had almost destroyed her, leaving behind a storm of her own creation. The Queen had not just left the board, she had flipped the entire table. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to the surface. It's a story of devastating betrayal, but also one of incredible strength and the fierce, unyielding power of a woman reclaiming her own narrative. The shattered watch was more than just a broken object. It was the sound of a gilded cage being smashed to pieces. What happens next? Does Julian's empire truly crumble? Does Amelia, with her newfound power and the impending birth of her child, find a new kind of happiness? The fallout from that day would echo for years to come.